Thank you so much, Mr. Krayden, for joining me on the Sami Parvez show. It is great to have you again this week.
Yes, nice to be back.
Yeah. So there is too much to talk politics, particularly as Liberal is chosen their new leader, Mark Carney, which was expected. This is not surprising, neither shocking for anyone, as everyone knew, but he won in a landslide victory. Even Christopher Freeland could not win from our own riding that much vote what Carney won, from that particular freelance writing. So is like liberals chosen their new leader, and he will be sworn in tomorrow, Friday. So what's next for Canada?
Next for Canada is have a new election because Carney is unelected. He was selected to lead the Liberal Party. He's a globalist plant. And if you look at the results from Sunday night,
Mhm.
and I was speaking to Ezra Levant from Rebel News on my own broadcast this morning, who reiterated a report that they had done earlier in the week. If you look at these results, Carney won 86, 87% in every riding in the country.
Yep.
These results are incredibly suspect, to say the least.
Yep.
I mean, do you really want me to believe that Chrystia Freeland is so unpopular in her own
Own
riding
writing.
that she got 7% of the vote? I don't believe it. Or Karina Gould couldn't do better than 4% in her own riding? That people just love Mark Carney so much that they're going to, every writing gave him 86%. I mean, oh, you'd have to be a fool to think this is somehow not being played. And the fact that two-thirds of the membership was disqualified just a
Yep.
couple of days before the vote. So this obviously, the Liberal Party wanted Mark Carney to win. I think the World Economic Forum wanted Mark Carney to win because we've heard Klaus Schwab say repeatedly he inserts people into the cabinets of the world. Justin Trudeau was inserted, but at least Justin Trudeau stood for office and was elected as an MP before he became leader of the Liberal Party. This is a backdoor issue here. Mark Carney became leader of the Liberal Party through the back door. Nobody really ever elected him to public office. And he couldn't even get the entire liberal leadership base to vote on this. And I think the results are highly suspect. And once again, the people who ran that leadership race, I won't say the name, but they're the same ones who have had problems around the world with voting when it's electronic voting. It's the same company, and I've covered them in the past, and they've had lots of problems. I'll say no more than that because you're not supposed to say anything about this company. They're very, 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 very sensitive. Even though there's been media reports around the world, everywhere they go, there's problems with the tabulation.
Mhm.
So I'm highly suspect. But I've been saying for weeks that, of course, Mark Carney's going to win. There was never any doubt Mark
Yep.
Carney was going to win. That's why they got rid of Ruby Dalla. She
Mhm.
was she was a strong second,
Yep.
and there was never. You notice too, Sammy, there were no polls throughout this.
Yep.
Very few, and I mean, Ruby Dalla did her own poll, and of course, people said, "Oh, okay, no, that's not accurate." I think it was. I think it was entirely accurate. I think she was a strong second. I
Yep.
think she could
Mhm.
possibly have won.
Yes.
And Mark Carney didn't want that. I don't for a minute believe Mark Carney is so massively popular with anybody in this country. I don't believe the polls. I don't believe Eco's polling. Ridiculous. He's going to win a majority government. So, but fine, we'll deal with Mark Carney.
Mhm.
But I can tell you this: he's being sworn in tomorrow at 11 o'clock. I think it is the Governor
Yep.
General's residence as Prime Minister. I believe he turned 60 today or yesterday.
Mhm.
So it's like a birthday gift for him. He's going to become Prime Minister. And go ahead, bring him on. I think he's going to call an earlier than possible election because the longer he stays around
Mhm.
for people to watch, and the longer he stays around to go to steel plants and look very uncomfortable wearing a hard hat, the better chance he has of losing the next election because he gets very tiring very fast and wears out his welcome.
Mhm. Yep. But like we always say that we don't elect a we don't elect a prime minister, but MPs do. Like, but MP did not vote for him at all. It means like this is very complicated system. Like when we have a election, like prime minister will deliver the throne speech, which will be voted in the house. So whenever it gets approved, so like they continue to govern, but it seems like, as you mentioned, it was a back door. I don't know, like why we have some loopholes in the most like democratic or essential democratic place, like House of Commons. Like we should not have something like just getting elected from the party and then becoming what so called like designated prime minister. So don't you think it is concerning?
It was very concerning because he played by the rules. These are the Westminster rules. You can do that, but it's not very common to become prime minister without even being elected
Yep.
to the House of Commons. And the visuals, the optics are terrible. And the man has never stood for public office. And you can say we don't elect a prime minister directly in this country. That's very true. It's not like voting for president in the United States. However, every time a party contests a federal election, you are voting, in a sense, for the leader of that party
Yep.
because you're voting for that party not just because you like your local MP or your local choice, but because you like the leader of the party. You think that person would make a good prime minister.
Yep.
And this, we got no say in this at all. And that's why I think at the very least we need an early election so Canadians can decide whether they like Mark Carney as much as the Liberal Party pretends we do. And if I see Carney mania break out, I'll be shocked. But that's exactly what the Liberal Party is telling us is happening right now. That this man is so incredibly popular, energetic, and and so engaging that liberals just voted for him en masse, and they couldn't see anybody else. It was just Mark Carney. So yeah, go and like I say, bring Mark Carney on. I think he's a weak candidate, and I think every time he opens his mouth, he says something that you have to say. I thought he had a PhD in economics. You think at least he could understand this, but he's really looking like the emperor with no clothes. He was highly vaunted as this savior of the Liberal Party, and he was going to be so good for Canada. And every time he talks about issues, he appears to be less and less good for Canada,
Mhm.
and more good for the globalist agenda.
Yep. Yeah. So like a poll, like I don't leisure poll today or yesterday, it says like Canadian press reported that Mark Carney could win the most seats in Quebec, and they could make a majority government. So what do you take, like right now we are seeing the Carney and Liberal Party, since Trudeau stepped down, it is boosting in the polls. So would they remain on the election day? As we know, like like I'm going to ask you again this one later, but there are expectations that Carney would call an election before March 24th. It could be like maybe tomorrow or Monday or 28 or 22, but it will be 24. But my question is, like, will these polls remain same on the election day?
Absolutely not, and I don't believe the polls right now. And when when I see polls like especially Ecos polling, I find Ecos generally is tendentious in its analysis and the questions it asks. I don't trust it. I don't believe the Leger poll. I don't for a minute think it's going to get any better for Mark Carney. And I think that's why he'll call an election because, as I said, the longer Canadians see Mark Carney, the less they're going to like him. He is not an easy person to like. He has the personality of a reptile. He is extremely difficult to sell, to market. The Liberals have done the best, but truly, really, all they've done is help him win a very controlled leadership race. The whole thing was very controlled. Everything about it was controlled. The debates were controlled. There was no debate. There was a love-in between
All,
four of them there, and they
yep.
all agreed on everything. And Mark Carney was disastrous in those debates, by the way, if you recall. He said a
Yep.
lot of things in French. And you mentioned that he's supposedly going to win more seats in Quebec. I don't believe that. The guy can barely speak French. Why is he so popular with
They're in
Quebecers?
Quebec.
I don't believe that. I just don't believe the poll. And if you think, well, you have to believe the poll. No, you don't, because the polls have been skewed for so long. And some polling has been so wrong that I don't believe. Because look at Donald Trump and Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Until the very last days of that campaign, Kamala Harris was either neck and neck with Donald Trump or she was ahead. All the major polling was saying that. Republican polling was saying Trump was way ahead in all the swing states. Turned out he was. Won them all. So I don't trust polling today. It is tendentious, just like the media is tendentious. It has an angle, it has an agenda. It's trying to sell a certain political candidate. So no, I don't believe it's going to happen that way. But I do think Carney will go sooner rather than later. He's not stupid. He sounds stupid at times, but obviously he's smart enough to have gone through Harvard and Yale and Oxford. He's smart enough to know that he better go now because it's not going to get any better for him.
Yep. So why this Carney is running from media? Like yesterday he was in steel plant, so he was taking a photo op and no steel worker is behind him, but his own like liberal MPs were there. And like I think that media is called SHK. They said they he refused to take any question. I think they ask like to turn off your mics whenever he's speaking with the workers. So why he's afraid from media?
He's afraid of the media because the media is slowly waking up to the fact that this guy really hasn't got that much on the ball. He's really not the candidate that they've been told he is. And the more we hear of Mark Carney, the less we like him. And he likes controlled situations. I had to laugh because the hard hat thing, he's got his own MPs wearing hard hats behind him. Like any of them have ever had to do that.
Yeah.
But it reminded me of the photo op with Justin Trudeau. Maybe this is why he didn't have them behind him because Trudeau was doing, I think it was a housing announcement. He had a bunch of
Yep.
construction workers behind him. And the one guy took his hard hat and put it in front of his head, put it in front of his face while Trudeau was talking, as if and almost bowed down to say, I'm ashamed to be standing here in this photo op, but I was forced to do so by my company. That's
Mhm.
why I'm standing here." The body language was so obvious. So I think Carney's afraid if he gets real people behind him and not MPs who are there to smile and clap him on the back. I think he's afraid he might get a reaction like that because Trudeau got that reaction. It elicited gales of laughter
Mm.
from around the country, probably the world. So he's very careful. Mark Carney, I don't think Mark Carney believes his own publicity. Maybe that's a strength because Justin Trudeau did believe his own publicity till the very, very end, until it became just so obvious that Canadians overwhelmingly started to hate him. I don't think Carney believes he's really as popular as the Liberal Party is saying. So he's being very careful. And he likes tightly controlled events, tightly controlled environments, just like the leadership race was tightly controlled. And if you notice at his events during the leadership campaign, he literally throw out journalists who he didn't want there. and
Yeah.
he would stop them at the door, or would stop
Yes.
them at the door.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yep.
any independent media, any new media, any small c conservative media
Yeah.
would be
Are not.
stopped at the door or ejected from the meeting.
Yep.
Now he doesn't even seem to trust CBC now. So I don't know. Sooner or later, you got to talk to somebody who calls himself a journalist. So I don't know what if he thinks this is going to continue for long, but we've seen it before. That politicians like tightly controlled environments, and he is definitely a politician who likes that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, you are right. Like he stopped. Like he did not give any interviews. He did not let independent media or other see conservative media to get in his campaign. But we always see like our prime minister, like Canada's prime minister, they always run away from media. But it is unlikely in the US, like there must be like a press conference or uh, uh every day, either from White House, uh or like whatever you call it, or I don't know, like press secretary, or
Yeah.
president himself, or other is secretary, or other department, like spokesperson should do a press conference once. But we don't see it here in Canada. So why is it like this? And do you think like US is more press freedom as compared to Canada?
Well, the anticipation that the government will at least send somebody up there to represent them. You have to remember, though, under Joe Biden was not very accessible.
Yep.
Donald Trump has done more news conferences, I think, in 2 months than Joe Biden did in 4 years. And Joe Biden would send up his press secretary or the White House press secretary every day or 5 days a week
Hmm.
and do the talking points. And that's seen to satisfy most of the mainstream media in the United States. And they waited far too long to really ask the difficult questions about Joe Biden,
Hmm.
who was clearly suffering from dementia.
Yep.
Clearly, anybody could tell that. When he
Yep.
did appear at events, there is something drastically wrong. Then the US media ignored that for years, literally years, they ignored it until it was just too obvious to ignore any longer. So I think the US media still has a larger anticipation of press freedom and accessibility to politicians, but it failed terribly during the Biden
Yes.
administration. And I think they're holding Trump up to a standard they would never hold Biden up to. And they're expecting constant media attention from Donald Trump. And they'll probably get it because Trump loves to get in front of the media. There's no question about it. He enjoys it. It emboldens him. It he thrives on that kind of attention. So you'll see lots of media attention from Donald Trump, and I don't think the press will ever complain about lack of it.
Hmm.
But
Yep.
you have to remember in Canada, you and I are not being subsidized by the federal government. Rebel News isn't being subsidized. Other new news agencies that aren't mainstream are not being subsidized. But CBC is getting $1.3 billion dollars a year at, from the federal government. And other news agencies, all news agencies that are mainstream are getting huge subsidization from the federal government. Does that influence the way they cover the news? Of course it does. Does that mean that they won't push too hard to get those interviews, to get that accessibility because they're quite comfortable getting the money because they think they might vanish without it? Sure, it has an effect. And I hope the first thing Pierre Poilievre does as prime minister is not only defund the CBC, but stop the subsidization.
Hmm.
We need to stop it completely because you're getting money from the government. It will affect the way you report the news about the government. There's just common sense.
Yes.
And that's a factor in Canada. They'll put up with lots of crap from Carney because Carney will continue the subsidization.
Hmm. Yep. And Carney appointed Marco Mendicino is the chief of staff. Like it was very surprising and shocking, and many liberal MPs were upset with this appointment because he endorsed like pro-Israel, like when Israel invade or whatever the conflict between Israel and Hamas. So where do you stand with this? It seems like this guy like Marco, he was thrown under the bus after like 2021 election, I believe, when the Freedom Convoy was over. So Trudeau removed him from his position. 2021 or 2022, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
don't recall. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so it's, and also Stephen Govald, he will no longer be the environment minister tomorrow, as per Toronto Star was reporting today. And also like Mark Miller, Trudeau's childhood buddy, he is no longer in the cabinet. So what do you take this thing? Is he doing any every these thing intentionally, or just he needs to do it? Like it seemed like he's just throwing away those cabinet who are very close to Trudeau. And like this Marco, like he was like kicked out from the cabinet. He brought him like closer.
Well, I'll start with Mark Miller is just too acerbic to have around, and I think Carney realizes that. The only reason he was there is because he's a friend of Trudeau. He is. I always say he's like the guy in high school at the back of the room who's always putting up his hand and always gets the answer wrong and blames the teacher for not having the wrong answer. Mark Miller is totally expendable. Now Gilbo, why is Gilbo leaving? It's part of Mark Carney's imagery that he is somehow more moderate on the environment than Justin Trudeau was or is. Getting rid of Guilbeault is untenable. The guy is so extreme, such a radical. He should never have been in cabinet in the first place. He is not a cabinet minister. He's a
Yep.
Greenpeace activist.
Hmm.
He's a climate change activist who should not be in the cabinet. Trudeau just loved him because he reflects Trudeau's ideas. Carney wants to get him out because Carney's pretending he's more moderate on the environment and that he wants to get rid of the carbon tax. Yeah. Maybe individually, but not on corporations, which will pass it on to you. Or he wants the carbon tariff, which is even worse. It's going to be a higher carbon tax in the end for Canadians. But getting rid of Gibo is strictly symbolic. It means, hey, I'm much more moderate than Trudeau. I'm almost like Pierre Poilievre. I'm Pierre Poilievre light. And that's how Carney's been marketing himself. Now, Marco Mendicino, I was floored when I saw this because, yeah, this is a guy, along with David Lametti, the former justice
Yep.
minister. Trudeau threw them under the bus after the Emergencies Act was
Yep.
declared because they were two of the strongest proponents. Along with Trudeau, you had the justice minister, Lametti, you had the public safety minister, Mendicino, totally backing Trudeau up on the Emergencies Act. When there was negative fallout after that, when people started to think, my God, Trudeau looked really authoritarian, crushing this peaceful protest in Ottawa, they were to blame.
Hmm.
And Trudeau conveniently got rid of these two and said, hey, if you hate anybody in this, hate these two, they're gone. And of course, both of them said, we're not going to run again. And they were out, completely out. And I tell you, they were angry at Trudeau. And that's why they said, we're not running again, because they were angry. But the fact that Mark Carney would choose Mendicino, who thought it was a big joke to send tanks after the Freedom Convoy protesters, thought it was a big joke to sick the Canadian Army on peaceful protesters. That says to me that Mark Carney's a dangerous man. And you have to remember, Mark Carney has said during the leadership race that he would use the federal government's emergency powers
Yep.
to promote and to advance his agenda. Now, the only federal emergency powers I'm aware of are called the Emergencies
The
Act.
act.
And that is something I think Carney would be freely use against people he doesn't like.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's got Mendocino in there, yeah, that says it all. It says also it's symbolic of a Carney regime that's very, very the same or very, very like the liberal under Trudeau. And yeah, he got rid of Gubo. That was very strategic, but it's also a huge statement to bring back Mendocino.
Mhm.
And I think it means business as usual with this Carney government. It's going to be just like the Trudeau government,
Mhm.
worse.
Yep. I agree, sir. But he is trying to slash the cabinet size right now, 70 to 20. But if he would get re-elected, is he going to do the same thing?
Oh, of course he'll do the same thing. He is he's a statist. He's a globalist. He's somebody who thinks you should be paying taxes, but he shouldn't be paying taxes. His company, Brookfield Assets Management, was only paying 5% corporate tax throughout the last decade of the Trudeau government. Other companies are paying 30% corporate tax. How come they got away with that? How come they were allowed to shelter hundreds of millions of dollars in Bermuda and not pay any tax at all?
Hmm.
That seems to me like a double standard. Like Mark Carney shouldn't pay taxes, but we all should pay taxes
Yes.
because we need to pay taxes to fight climate change. We need to
Mhm.
pay taxes to fight for Mark Carney's ideas. And that to me is just the worst kind of hypocrisy from a politician. It's going to be just as bad under Mark Carney. Yeah, reduce the size of cabinet. That is just so typical. I mean, uh, Paul Martin tried the same thing. I think, although Paul Martin was a little more sincere about it, but a lot of liberals will do that after a particularly hated liberal regime will reduce the size of cabinet and will convince Canadians we want smaller government. He doesn't want smaller government. He wants the government to be just as invasive into your life. He wants the government to take more taxes from you. He wants the government to be more important and more of an impediment than it is right now in our lives. And Mark Carney, look the guy up, read what he said in the past. He's an admirer of Karl Marx. I'm not making this up. He has said so in written things he has done over the years. He admires Vladimir Lenin, the first dictator of the Soviet Union. He has said that he wants to replace the US dollar as the primary world currency with the Chinese yuan. This is a guy who has got very, very serious pro China connections and pro globalist connections. Even more so than I think Justin Trudeau had, because Trudeau was pretty flighty, pretty flaky. Carney is a serious man, and I think that's what makes him more dangerous because he is serious about implementing an agenda and fooling people that he's really not going to be as bad as Trudeau, and he's much more moderate. He's not. And
Mhm.
just look at his record. Look at what he said over the years, and Canadians are increasingly finding that out right now, that he is not the person he pretends to be.
Mhm. And what's your take on Trudeau is stealing House of Commons chair?
Stealing the House of chair? I'm sorry, you've lost me on that one. What?
Like, so what's your take on Trudeau was stealing the House of Commons chair? Like he sat there, I don't know, like for since like becoming the prime minister, now he's taking it to home. Like, did he pay for it or it was paid by
I
taxpayers?
I totally missed that one, Sam. I didn't see that at
Oh, really?
all. He's taking the chair home with
Yeah,
him.
you must see that picture.
Well, I know they sold the seats from the old Yankee Stadium for quite a bit of money. Uh, I have never heard of anything so ridiculous. He wants to bring the seat home with him. That I don't know of any other prime minister in history who's ever even suggested that. But that goes with Trudeau's lunacy and his, shall we say, his immaturity as a man in his 50s who still acts like a man or a teenager at times. Taking the chair home. Now that's incredible. That's the first I've heard of that. But
Wow.
I'm not really surprised to find that out. But It's just there's no end to this man's craziness. It's just
Hmm.
that's amazing.
Hmm.
But
Yep. Yeah, this is what. And like, so NDP were complaining that they were not reached out by Carney's office, like to extend the to keep this government alive for much longer. So is it over for NDP at all? Like maybe Singh won't win his own seat in the next election.
well, Singh has already said he wants to prop up the government. So why would Carney even bother talking to him? There's no point because Singh is in his pocket already.
Yep.
He doesn't need to negotiate with Jagmeet Singh because Jagmeet Singh's in the Liberal Party's pocket. He's been there for years. And Carney knows he can rely on his support, but Carney also knows he's not going to wait around for an election because he can't afford to. So he doesn't need Jagmeet Singh's votes or his support in any event because I believe very strongly he's going for an early election. I heard Monday, Sammy. I don't know if you heard this. The Conservative Party has already started issuing lawn signs
Wow.
to supporters. So, do you think maybe they heard something? Yeah, I think it's the news is out there. If you talk to anybody that works on the Hill, they're all hearing the same thing. I don't work on the Hill anymore. I worked on the Hill for 8 years,
Wow.
and people and the staffers know as soon as the MPs know.
Mhm.
And I can tell you, when they start putting lawn signs out in March, they're expecting an election because it's not the greatest weather. And if people start putting lawn signs out in March for a July election, they're probably in terrible shape by the time the election runs around. So I think this is a good indication. Sometimes it's something that banal that tells you it's election time.
Mhm.
And when the lawn signs start to get distributed to party supporters, I think that's a good indication there's an election. And as I said, Carney cannot afford to sit around for 6 months and while people watch him get further and further away from expectations. And that's exactly what he's doing. The longer he's there, the farther he drifts from the expectations of not just the Liberal Party, but many Canadians who thought he was a golden boy.
Mhm.
Saw it before. And I'll tell you when, because you have a real good sense of Canadian history. I saw it before in 1984 with John Turner.
Yes.
John Turner came out of retirement, basically. He was the guy who stood up against Pierre Trudeau's fiscal policy. He was a blue liberal. He was probably as conservative as Brian Mulroney in many ways. But he comes out of retirement. He's supposed to be the golden boy of liberal politics, good looking, Rhodes Scholar, athletic, drank Chivas Regal Scotch. Great. Everybody liked John Turner. He was going to save the party. And of course, the longer he stayed in front of the camera in the public view, the lower his polling numbers went because people said, hey, he's just not what we expected. And the same thing is going to happen to Mark Carney. He's like the second coming of John Turner. It- People have huge expectations. Liberals have huge expectations for this man, and he's going to let them down. And
Mhm.
that's why he wants an election now.
So if we would have an election, what do you think? When can we expect it?
No. I think we'll have an early April election,
Early
like
April.
early to mid-April, maybe April 15th. Sounds good.
So it would be like 33 days campaign or 37. I think it's 37 to
It'll be
50
the
days.
it'll be the minimum. It won't be like the last or the 2015,
Hmm.
which was ridiculous. I think that was like 2.5 months long. I
Yeah.
don't know why Harper ever did that because that campaign killed him.
Hmm.
Had it been a 30-day campaign, I think Stephen Harper might have won in 2015. It's because it dragged on and on and on. And he looked worse and Justin Trudeau looked better as the campaign went on. And because he had horrible campaign advice. But that's beside the point. But no, Carney will want like a 30-day campaign as quick as possible. That's the way his mind thinks. That's the way he behaves. And so I think he could say April 15th. Sounds good to me.
Hmm.
It really could happen that quickly. He could call an election tomorrow
Tomorrow.
as soon as he's sworn in. As soon as he's sworn in, he
Yeah.
could run. He could say, "Oh, by the way, Madam Governor General, I have another thing to discuss with you. Let's call an election." And I think that could happen very, very quickly. If not tomorrow, it could happen next week.
I think he is also planning to first official visit to Europe next week. Did you hear it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe he
So
will run around the globe. Then you may call an election before being accused that using the taxpayer money during an election campaign.
yeah, I think it's going to come sooner. Maybe April 30th to be safe. That sounds a little more realistic. But it's certainly I think it's imminent. Any day now, you're going to have an election call,
Hmm.
and I think that's if we can thank Mark Carney for anything, we can thank him for that. I
Yeah.
hope he's the shortest serving prime minister in history, but at least I think he's going to do the right thing.
Think.
Of course, it's the right thing for him, not for Canadians, but it will turn out to be the right thing for Canadians if he calls an election because we need one. We need a legitimate government. We need to stop talking trade war and retaliatory tariffs and we're going to take on Donald Trump and we're going to fight the United States. I mean, Chrystia Freeland, insanity, lunacy about nuclear weapons and it's all got to stop. Let's have an election, get rid of these bums, and
Yep.
let's have a legitimate government and get beyond this crazy rhetoric that's out there right now and the stupid talk about fighting the United States until the end of time because it's a war we're going to lose every time. We're not going to win this. And
Hmm.
I don't care if Mark Carney wants to pretend it's like a hockey game.
Yep.
It's not. It's
Hmm.
not like a hockey game. It's like taking on the most powerful country in the
On earth.
world
Hmm.
that is completely energized and galvanized right now under Donald Trump, and it will fight back. And don't think for a minute it's like a hockey game, and all we have to do is elbow the opponent. These people are crazy.
So where do you see like the MPs race? Will it be a stable or is there any talks they would freeze it?
And they freeze.
MPs pay raise which will go effect on April 1st.
Oh, that's a good question. I can't see them freeze it because they all agree it's a great thing.
Mhm.
That's why they did it automatically.
Yeah.
They it drives me crazy because you think somebody should stand up on principle and say, I really don't need another race, but I think it'll go through because all the politicians love it. Every party they'll support it. They think they're worth it.
Hmm. Yeah, but we see like Doug Ford is more leaning toward liberals as compared to conservative. We never saw Doug Ford is sitting down with Pierre Pouliot, but he sat down with Mark Carney to have a breakfast in Toronto as Carney flew to Toronto, then went to Hamilton. So, what's your take? Why Doug Ford is keeping aside to the conservative? Like we saw like in 2019 and 2020 elections too. Doug Ford was not involved endorsing any conservatives or any conservative leader.
Doug Ford is a two-faced faux conservative, as I call him, meaning a phony conservative. And he was in Justin Trudeau's pocket for the last 4 years at least.
Yep.
Totally on side with these electric vehicle plants that are all going to go broke. Totally on side with the Emergencies Act. Just loves Justin. Now he loves Mark Carney. But of course, just last week he was talking fire and brimstone about Donald Trump going to shut the electricity off. Almost an act of war. This is stupidity.
Yeah.
He's going to shut down hospitals while they're operating.
Hmm.
Cut the electricity. Are you, Doug Ford? Are you going to do that? Doug Ford, I'm not taking anything from these guys. I am a fighter. He sits down with the Commerce Secretary Lutnick for what, a half an hour? He comes out completely humbled. This man was destroyed in half an hour. And now it's like, well, we're going to be reasonable. We're going to see things in a different light now because I've had a nice conversation. So Doug Ford, he plays everything. He plays his cards under the table. He is going to say, Mark Carney is a wonderful guy because if Mark Carney does hang on to win, well, Doug Ford will be in his pocket just like he was Justin Trudeau.
Hmm.
When Pierre Poilievre appears to be winning, watch for Doug Ford to come back as the the little guy the Ford Nation, the populist, he's just like Pierre Poilievre. He's been fighting for conservative values for 10 years in Ontario. And
Hmm.
I could write the script for him because I know the loonies who write the script for him. It's the same people who work for all kinds of so-called conservatives. And it's the same talking points and it's the same nonsense. And Doug Ford will get the same script as soon as he realizes he's going to have to work with Pierre Poilievre. Oh, he's going to be a different man. He's going to be a humbled man. But I don't understand how I could ever have thought that about Mark Carney. I don't know why I work so closely with Justin Trudeau. But you do what you'd have to do to survive. And he will be so accommodating to Pierre Poilievre. He will be his best friend, just like he's now Mark Carney's best friend. And he just loves Mark Carney. So I don't like Doug Ford. I don't trust him as far as I could throw that bulk of a human being. And I really don't think he's sincere about anything except Doug Ford staying in power in some form or another.
Yep. Doug Ford is staying in power, like as he called a meaningless election, like last month, which costed
Totally.
Ontarians $189 million, and nothing changed in the Queens Park. All seats are same, like whatever they had before, they have it now, and it will remain. They will be in power for next 4 years, and also is unfreezing MLA's pay raise. Like they will ever raise. I don't know like when, but they would have it.
But as you noted, I think with the last time we spoke, and I've said as well, Doug Ford called that election because he was anticipating the liberals taking the federal government, keep staying in the federal government, or no, sorry, the possibility of the conservatives winning the next election. And he wanted to win a provincial victory because in Ontario, the tradition has always been if there's a liberal government federally, there's a conservative government provincially. If there's a federal government that's conservative, there's a provincial liberal government. So I think that's the only reason he called
Yep.
this election on the chance that Pierre Poilievre and the conservatives would win the next election, and he would have to call the election after that fact. And he was thinking, I could lose because, hey, it's like the Ontario curse. It's going to happen to me too. And I think that's the only reason he had this election.
Yeah, I agree. You are absolutely right. So, is there anything else you would like to share, which I did not ask you, or we did not discuss today?
Um, I'm thinking here. I would say that reiterate, look at Mark Carney's history, and it's nothing like the man you saw at the coffee shops throughout. And that's the other thing. Yeah, that's the point I wanted to make. I totally forgot this. If you listen to Mark Carney's victory speech on Sunday, and I did, I listened to the whole thing probably twice actually because I was editing copy from it for my broadcast. It's the same speech he delivered about 25 times across the country because I kept saying, I've heard this one before because he said, Pierre Poilievre is one of these guys, and I've known him all my life, who just loves the private sector, even though he's never worked in it. And I thought, where have I heard that before? Probably about a dozen other times he said the same thing. And he couldn't even be bothered writing a victory speech. I think because it didn't feel like a victory. He knew he was going to win. He waltzed in there and he said, well, no suspense here, no anticipation. I'm going to win this thing. I know it. So why bother writing a new speech? So he brought out the same speech. And I thought, isn't that gall? The guy can't even be bothered writing a victory speech about how gratified he is. Thank you, all of these wonderful people who voted for me. No, he had to read the same speech he's been reading for the last 30 days.
Yep.
And I thought, there's something lacking here in both imagination and vision in this man.
Hmm.
And I think that doesn't bode well for his future because he's a one-trick pony. And that is, I'm an outsider, which of course you look at that for more than 5 minutes and you say, yeah, right. You're a globalist. You've been working for the Trudeau government for 10 years in one shape, form, or another. You're the Mr. Insider. You have never been an ordinary Canadian since you left high school.
Mhm.
And your whole life has been privilege and being cloistered in the global elites. And that's what this man is all about. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Okay, David, thank you very much for joining me on this week on the Sami Parvez show. Hopefully, looking forward to seeing you again on the next week.
Always a pleasure, and I'll be back.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing my videos on your YouTube channel. It is always a great help and always get boost my subscriber and viewership.
Well, we'll do it again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Until then, you please take a good care and see you next week.
Okay, see you next week.
Thank you.